This noble and elegant town has seen every malignancy, seeping from sewer to palace, from lounge rooms to drains, where contagions have spread in the flow of the innocent folk. It's a host to the rats and the fleas. It has fed every plague and has nourished diseases as if they were born by the smog and the slime that bedecks the illustrious buildings and pavements. The shops with their vigorous trade and the grand institutions at times would succumb to the pestilence battening down, till the shadows of deadly disease would be carted in barrows and dumped in a further abyss with its festering germs. The imperial buildings were ghosted by virulent filth, where the cultured and opulent streets were awash with the toxins of numerous alleyways, plying their fluids like tributaries, oozing with death, like a wound that is open perpetually, never to heal, like the gash of the fateful Philoctetes. London was host to the abject as much as the glorious, nor were the wealthy immune. Both the rich and the poor would succumb to diseases that spread their demotic infection, regardless of status or pomp or the way that one spoke. One was equally close to the gutter. The difference was small if the rich had the honour of dying in sheets that were smoother. It wasn't advances in medicine that lessened the danger, so much as some wise engineering, especially with plumbing, for draining the massive unthinkable volumes of effluent. Sometimes, when common bacteria couldn't be blamed, but insidious viruses, keeping the townsfolk apart was the only available treatment, and so it remains. It is hard to maintain, and I feel how it strains at our patience in spacious and generous Blackheath, a suburb of London, where gratefully now with the COVID-19 we have distancing built in the very design of our medium density. Once it appeared like an idyll. The streets with their trees were the frame for the houses with gardens that spread to the side and presented a series of bowers and intimate spaces, as if in a painting from earlier humanist centuries. Now if we walk in our street, we're in need of a purpose and even apology. Quickly we scuttle indoors, when the mission is over, and nervously feel some relief that our risky exposure to sly diabolical molecules comes to an end as we ritually wash our extremities. Not that our fear is disabling, we're lucky in comfort, so long as the virus forbears from its dastardly progress, or else we're the fortunate some who are asymptomatic. Yet no one is free of the stickier grief of the crisis, since just as the molecules multiply, harden and bunch themselves, so the effects of precautions and careful restrictions coagulate, choking the flow of the means of exchange, as if blocking the lungs and the arteries, both as a metaphor and a reality. All that we've gathered to tackle it isn't a lot. It's the same kind of measure of distancing, formerly used in pandemics for over a century. Somewhat effective, but feared to be quite unsustainable. People are told to remain in their houses or leave it for only essential or strict unavoidable reasons to lessen exposure and minimize contact and movement. The rules are enlightened. I wish that we'd kept to them more. To reduce the alarmingly swift exponential transmission that rapidly then overwhelms the resources in hospitals. But And the catch is outrageous. The wholesome directive is scorned by the government eager to save the economy. No one is happy that businesses falter, economies crash, because no one can work, and so no one can earn and pay bills. So the sure circulation of money has ground to a halt, and the spirit of commerce is stifled or gasps for a breath, like the patient who suffers the very disease that we're fighting. Occluding the flow of the capital mimics the impasse of fluids that course in the body, the same kind of virus that sits in the airways or vessels and spreads and then hardens, extends by a fateful analogy right to the methods by which we attempt to restrict its inevitable growth, as the medicine has damaging side effects, killing consumption of formerly popular services, travel and shopping, the restaurants, cafes, and nor hospitality only, but cultural prospects like theatre or music and galleries. Even when rules will allow that they open their doors, the extent of the patronage pales by the rates of the past, as the strained and exiguous traffic is keen to get home. The disease, after all, has the vigorous, smart circulation that commerce is missing. It lurks in our innocent company, spreads in our happiest gatherings, making them toxic and filling the genial people with guilt and remorse for the liberties taken to laugh or shake hands or to smile when the face, if it's brought among humans, had better be masked. We retract from events that we formerly liked to support and attempt to rebuild in our homes what was always beyond them, in spaces that spoke of community. Now they lie desolate, or, if they're patronised, something about them is off-putting, making us fear that they harbour the ghastly infection, as if what was formerly lofty recedes to the abject, and glorious cultural projects inspire suspicion. So everything backward and retrograde forces the moment. In fleeing society, fearful of contact, we hide ourselves, loathing the thought that we come across people who talk to us. Now, misanthropically, people are seen as the scourge, the insidious vectors of virus who visit contagion on anyone near to them. People disturb and disgust us, repelling our sense of containment and hygiene and privacy. Horror at seeing a gathering makes us so inward, as if isolation, the delicate means that protect us, is strangely internalized, lodged in our insular psyche, and henceforth constructs the attractively social as evil. This hateful morbidity saps what was previously generous, making us mean to the world and protective of silence, a taciturn kind of withdrawal that despises exchange and promotes the conceited belief in a dumb self-assurance. And physically too, the extent of the new scrupulosity, preciously washing and wiping with stressful anality, now reinforces the worst of our old paranoia for germs and infections. Not long in the clinical past, we were making our peace with the fact of ubiquitous germs and resisting the pressure to clean as an act of purgation, neurotically battling the innocent basis of nature. We noticed that houses and hospitals subject to cleaning with rigorous efforts and harsh and extreme disinfectants were actually richer in bugs than neglected environments, not if they're totally filthy, but cleaned without agonies. None of this moderate thinking survives with the virus. It cannot be said that we're overprotective or zealous, beyond what is needed. There's never a threshold or stage where we think that precautions are overemployed and excessive. It's more the reverse. If we hear of a measure elsewhere that is greater than those that we institute here, we feel guilty. We aren't as committed and serious, resolute, canny as people who demonstrate greater attention and diligence. Also, we notice that measures for keeping our distance have helped us in curbing the other infections that vex us, the colds that we suffered all year that have now disappeared. So empirical evidence flows from each person's experience, teaching us not to make physical contact with dubious people. The fear, I believe, will endure for a very long time. And it's hard to imagine it passing before perpetuity. Various countries adopted severer procedures for strict social distancing. Those that achieved it did better than those that were lax in reducing the number of cases, and therefore the deaths that result from them all in proportion. It hence reinforces a paradigm new to the world, where the medical experts have altered the means of production. No longer does capital rule. There is something that trumps it. A state of emergency, similar to war. It's a crisis, and markets are held in abeyance till peace is concluded. For some, it's a marvel that public priorities triumph against the decree of the market. Consumption is thwarted, the petrol is saved, and the jet fuel remains in the tankers. A weird revolution, as if all those admirable greenies had somehow prevailed, and discouraging tax on consumption had lessened the traffic and other emissions from companies, always attuned to increasing their business and profits. One says that it isn't sustainable. Something must give. And the force of the market that faithfully follows demand is allowed to employ once again the demoralized workforce, encourage investment and confidence. There's the rub. Because if we had hoped for enlightened, benign conservation, we see that the country and globe are intent on reversing it. Yes, it is true that consumption is held in abeyance, but only till markets are quickly restored to their vigour and trade recommences once more with its former expenditures. All that this tense moratorium really achieves is to spell the recalcitrant dominance out in our soul, that a world without capital crashes, and this is the crisis, the indisposition that trammels the whole of the planet, where small interventions to save the environment struggle, and capital, meanwhile, devours the restricted resources, depleting the fuel from the fossil reserves, which it burns to unleash the destructive pollution in layers of air that absorbs excess warmth from the sun and increases the temperature. Even the virus is impotent. Maybe for weeks, perhaps months, there's a dent in the global production of gases. But then it is sure to resume when our feet get impatient and seek the abundance of services seized in the past, with their bonus of healthy and trusty commercial stability, low unemployment and money for general welfare. I'd love to believe that some lasting and valuable benefit grew from the morbid restrictions and taught us some lessons, that inner resources and old self-reliance are adequate. Surely the planet needs less of the goods and the services currently capped by well-meaning benign intervention. But all that it's proved is that citizens crave a normality built from conditions that always existed. They hate it that everything changes and businesses falter or fail. When demand artificially shrinks and the money recedes, and the chain of insoluble credit behaves like a virus where bills are unpaid because no one's acquitting our own. To endure this predicament, something must radically change in the way that economies function. The substance of money would have to be softened through pledges of duty and trust. But the social experiment isn't proposed or designed, and a world without money has less probability even than finding a world without sickness or sadness or crime. So the crisis that starts in material terms is extended and spreads to a spiritual inner malaise of inertia, a feeling of bleak incapacity. Surely the moment suggests that society ought to progress and develop. Yet all that we cling to is bringing normality back. It is hardly the moment for bold revolutions. The crisis lies deep in ourselves, where alternative visions elude us, and all that we've got are the paradigms destined to failure. We haven't the swagger, the arrogant clutch of conceits for reforming economies withers and falls from our grasp, and in place of creative responses we shrink to anxiety, lonely and frightened in watching our worldview unravel. The one consolation is knowing that cultures are stable, when rooted to household and home, that we always control, where domestic attention is calming and quaintly rewarding. The moment is twisted and good for exalting our modesties. What was naive and contained has been raised to a virtue akin to survival, as if the inversion of values from biblical times had returned, where the things that were lofty or proud and illustrious fall to derision and scorn, and the things that were formerly loathed with contempt and disdained as lowly in dignity now are extolled as magnificent. Cleaning and cooking, the service of bathroom and scullery. Once there were maids in the house that we're lucky to occupy, women who served the more privileged middle-class owners. They used to attend to the housework in daily submission to zealous, imperious taskmasters earning their income in fragile, oppressive conditions like bondage or slavery. Good that they're gone, and not just for our conscience and fairness, but rather for leaving their manifold, tedious labours to us, who would otherwise languish without a commendable purpose. Assuming their onerous duties has been our redemption. We thrive and rejoice in their beastly and dull tribulations, and swell with the pride of maintaining impeccable floors, or at least for a day when the surfaces glisten. Thereafter euphoria yields to a mild and reduced satisfaction that labours are possible, even remotely rewarding. But look, where the fortunate middle class, less than entitled, but still in the spacious surrounds of comparative luxury, how can we ever take joy in our warm insulation from all the distress of the world when it circles around us? It mightn't affect us in personal freedom and privilege, but even our peace is unsettling since nobody shares it. Our ease is uneasy. The calm that we feel is unnatural, edgy, precarious, tense, as if something will give. We're configured to live in gregarious movement with people, exchanging our worries and blessings and cheerful security. Now that we keep ourselves so conscientiously separate, we languish for contact and longing to hobnob and mingle. We feel ourselves ever more lonely and tired and single.